All right, so good morning, everyone. Thank you again for having us today for what is now our fourth installment of this presentation series with your MCH group. Once again, my name is Fernando Cosillo, attorney with the Medical Legal Partnership. And this morning, we're joined by Mary Yanagihara, who is one of our standout clinical students and a soon-to-be graduate of the law school. She's kind enough to be volunteering her time to present this information from Japan, where she's currently overseas working on an externship program. So far, over the past month or so, we've presented on an array of issues. I think the first presentation was on landlord-tenant law. The second, Dina provided some critical updates on the COFA-CIFA impact changes. And just last week, we hosted Riley Detman from Work Now Hawaii, who provided some great information on employment rights, job training, employment resources for those with disabilities, as well as building allyship so that we can all be more mindful about working with individuals with disabilities and conditions. Which brings us to today's presentation, which will be on the Family Medical Leave Act, which provides benefits and job protections to those who qualify and are experiencing a medical situation. And as always, we'll record this presentation. We'll try to edit it down so that we're just providing the critical information and make it available to you folks afterwards for review purposes, hopefully upload it to our YouTube channel as well. And we'll be sure to reserve some time at the end for questions and feedback. So without further ado, I'll turn the reins over to Mary so that she can facilitate her presentation. I'll put myself on mute and I'll continue to admit people as they come in. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you, Fernando, for the introduction. And thank you everyone for attending this meeting today. If you could, Fernando, if you could let me know if I have any technical difficulties or if the audio is not coming through, that would be great. So this presentation is about how and when to use the Family Medical Leave Act. So let's get into it. So the FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act, it's a federal law, and as far as its coverage, there are certain things that I'm going to go over. So the first thing is which employers are covered by this law, which employees are eligible. Those are two major questions that you want to ask when anyone wants to use the FMLA. It's going to provide 12 weeks of leave per year for qualifying family and medical reasons, like birth, adoption, and other things. If you use the FMLA, you can continue your group health benefits like your employer health insurance and be restored to the same or virtually identical position at the end of each leave period. So as far as covered employers, they have to fall into one of three categories. The first category is private employers with 50 or more employees in 20 or more work weeks in the current or previous calendar year. So they have to be larger businesses. It couldn't be a really small business. It could also be a public agency or an educational agency. So public agencies could include working for the city and county of Honolulu or working for a certain division within the state government. And then educational agencies could include schools, regardless of if they're public or private, as long as they're not universities. So all of those would fall under the FMLA, regardless of the number of employees. Let's see. I think UH does fall under the FMLA because of the size. For eligible employees, you have to have worked at least 12 months for your employer, but these 12 months don't need to be consecutive. They could be spread out in the last 7 years. You have to have worked at least 1,250 hours in the last 12 months, which is an average of 26 hours per week. And you have to work at a location where your employer has 50 employees within 75 miles. So for us, that translates to 50 employees within the state of Hawaii or within the island. So that is how to figure out if your employer is covered by the FMLA and if you are eligible to receive benefits under the FMLA. So the FMLA will provide you with 12 weeks of leave. It could be consecutive or it could be intermittent, which means you take a little bit of leave at a time. If you and your employer make an agreement about you working a reduced schedule for a medical condition. However, employer approval is not needed to take intermittent leave to care for a child. So if your child has a serious health condition and you want to take FMLA leave intermittently or work part-time, like work a reduced schedule, you can do that and you don't need special consent from your employer. So that's a special provision in the FMLA just to protect the parent's right to take a reduced schedule to take care of their sick child. Are there any questions so far? Then I'll move on. For requesting leave, generally you should give 30 days advance notice. So once you determine that you will need to use the FMLA, you need to notify your employer of your intent to use the FMLA leave. If it's a medical emergency, then you should notify your employer as soon as practicable. So you can actually begin taking FMLA leave right away if it's an emergency. And then as soon as it's possible, notify your employer. So that would be hopefully like more of a rare case where you are not able to give any notice. Once you request leave, your employer can notify you of the terms of the leave with its own forms or with the standard government forms, which are these wage and hour division forms, WH381. And we'll look over the form later because that is the form that the healthcare provider might be receiving from the employer to try to figure out what kind of documentation is needed to back up their FMLA leave. Is FMLA paid or unpaid? So this is an important question for most people. So generally, FMLA is unpaid. Those 12 weeks would just be unpaid leave, but you still get to keep your health insurance and be restored to your job after you return. However, if you have accrued paid leave from your employer, like vacation, personal and family leave, or sick leave, then you can use that at the same time as your FMLA leave. So say you have the 12 weeks, and then you have 2 weeks of vacation. So the first 2 weeks of your leave are paid, and then you have another 10 days of sick leave. So those are also paid. And then you have 5 days of family leave saved up. You can end up having more than a month of paid leave. And then the rest of the 12 weeks would just be unpaid FMLA leave. For documentation, your employer, under the law, they may require reasonable documentation to prove two things: a family relationship and a serious medical condition. So family relationship is for cases where you're dealing with an employee wants to take care of their family member. The employer might require proof of that family relationship. That could be a simple written statement or a copy of an official document. If you are caring for a family member with a serious medical condition, You may be required to provide a medical certification from your doctor or healthcare provider. And those are the wage and hour division forms, and we'll look at where to find them and what the forms look like later on. In general, documentation requirements are not considered to be, they're not supposed to prevent you from taking leave in the first place, but they're a way for the employer to confirm that you actually are eligible for leave. So there are 5 qualifying reasons that allow you to use FMLA leave: adoption, birth, family, military, and yourself. For adoption, so when can you use the FMLA for adoption and what kind of documents are required? Adoptive parents can take FMLA leave for the placement of the child for adoption or foster care within 12 months after the placement to bond with the child and before the actual placement for pre-adoption obligations. Such obligations could include counseling sessions, court appearances, consultations with the attorney or doctors representing the birth parents, physical examinations, or travel to another country to complete an adoption. In other words, you can take FMLA leave for adoption before the placement, at the actual placement, and then 12 months after the placement. So that's the time frame. For definitions and documents, adoption means legally and permanently assuming responsibility for raising the child as one's own. So it must be a formal legal adoption. And for documentation, leave for adoption is not necessarily a medical type of leave, so medical certification is not required. But the family relationship certification would be required. And this can consist of a simple written statement or a copy of an official document, like a court document. The next situation where you could use FMLA leave is for childbirth and caring for an infant. So when can you use Family Medical Leave Act for birth and what kinds of documents are required? So mothers and fathers can both take FMLA leave to bond with their newborn child. And a mother can take FMLA leave for prenatal care, incapacity due to pregnancy, and her own serious illness after childbirth. The father can also take FMLA leave to care for his spouse who's incapacitated due to pregnancy or childbirth. For the bonding purpose of leave, it's within 12 months of birth of the child. The documentation requirements, no certification is needed for pregnancy. So if you tell your employer, I want to take FMLA leave because I'm pregnant and I'm going to give birth, your employer cannot ask you for a doctor's note certifying that you are in fact pregnant. The employer just has to go on your statement. For certification of a family relationship, that might be required for bonding time after the birth. So within the 12 months after the child is born. For that, you can submit a simple statement confirming your relationship, like this is my newborn child, and a copy of the birth certificate. And then medical certification is only required if there's a serious health condition involved. So you only need a doctor's note. You don't need a doctor's note for a normal pregnancy or if your baby is healthy. You only need a medical certification if you're saying your leave is because of a serious health condition. So if, say, the mother is pregnant and they have an incapacitating health condition that prevents them from going to work. in that case, they might be required to get a doctor's note for the doctor to certify that they are unable to come to work. Okay, the third situation where you could take this FMLA leave is to care for a family member. So I'm going to go over which family members qualify and what kinds of documents are required. So the FMLA defines family member kind of narrowly to only parents, spouses, and children. So in the FMLA, your cousins, aunts, uncles, and brothers and sisters are not considered family members that you could take leave for. So this is kind of a weird thing in the law. So a parent under the FMLA is defined, it could be an adoptive parent, step parent, biological parent, foster parent, or someone who acted as your parent when you were a child. So like your guardian when you had been a child. A spouse is a husband or wife as defined and recognized by the state in which the employee was married, which includes individuals in common law marriage and married same-sex couples. And then a child could be an adopted or foster child, a stepchild, a legal ward, or a child of a person who's standing in local parentage to the child. So someone that you are acting as their parent, but they aren't your biological child. The child also has an age requirement. The child has to be under 18, or the child can be over 18 if they are incapable of self-care. So if the child is disabled, the age requirement does not apply. For documentation, the employer can require a statement of a family relationship, which could be a simple written statement or an official document, and a certification from the doctor, which includes the contact information and the length of time that you will need to care for the family member. So there are specific government forms that you can download that will make sure that you provide all the information that the employer needs. So we'll go over where to find those forms later on. You can also use FMLA to care for a service member. So how does this differ from using FMLA for a family member, and what kinds of documents are required? So this differs from the other reasons in that you can actually take up to 26 weeks of FMLA leave in a single 12-month period to care for a service member who has been wounded or has a serious health condition due to their service in the armed forces. You can also take leave related to military deployments. So if there is some emergency that is caused by the fact that your family member has been deployed, you can take FMLA leave for that reason. And this provision also defines family a lot more broadly. So it includes next of kin, like sisters, brothers, cousins, etc. Lastly, you can take FMLA leave for your own serious medical condition. A serious medical condition, generally, you can think of it as something that prevents you from doing your job. The way it's defined as is an illness, injury, impairment, or physical or mental condition that involves either inpatient care or continuing treatment by a healthcare provider. This continuing treatment has to involve 3 days of incapacity, followed by a visit to a healthcare provider with a schedule of recurring like checkups. So the serious medical condition has to be kind of a, let's see, it's kind of a high bar that you need to meet. Generally, it's not something like a cold or a flu, but it could be something like a more serious disease or illness. Your employer can require medical certification containing contact information from the healthcare provider, when the condition began and how long it'll last, information showing you cannot perform the essential functions of the job, and in the case of intermittent leave, information about duration and frequency of absences. So I'll go to the next slide. The next section is about FMLA forms. So we have the notification form and the medical certification forms. So how to find the provider forms, the healthcare provider forms for medical certification. You can find them if you Google NIH FMLA forms and go to the second result, what kind of documentation and paperwork is required. So this first one also works, but there's a lot more text on it, so it's harder to find the forms. So this second link is the best one for finding them. And NIH has set this up, and you have the 5 forms here. So the first one is certification of healthcare provider for employees' serious health condition. So that's for if the employee has a serious health condition. The second one is for if the employee's family member has a serious health condition. The third one is if there's some problem related to the service member's deployment. The fourth one is for a service member's serious health condition. And the last one is for a veteran or a military caregiver. So these first 2 are the ones that you would typically see, and then the last 3 are all for military purposes. If a patient has FMLA leave, they've requested it from their employer is required to give them notification of the terms of the leave within 5 days. And this is the form that you would see that would show you what kind of medical certification and what kind of family documentation is required. It has 3 sections, so eligibility, documentation, and rights and responsibilities. First section, here in the beginning, they just say on this date, we received notice that you need leave beginning on this date for which one of the following reasons. So the employer will check off one of these boxes. These are the 5 reasons that we went over today. Next, for eligibility, the employer will determine if you're eligible or not eligible for leave. And if you're not eligible, they need to let you know which one of the requirements you did not meet. Next is the documentation requirements. So it could be no additional information is needed, or there's some certification needed. This one is for medical certification. Let's see. And they will give a due date over here. They have to allow 15 days for the employee to get the medical form signed and returned to them. That's the statutory minimum, is 15 days. So usually they just put a date 15 days after the date of this form. The third situation is for a family relationship. And it says here, you may choose to provide a simple statement of the relationship or the birth certificate, court document, etc. And then the 4th section is other information. So that would cover military leave. The 3rd section is notice of rights and responsibilities. So they say that you are able to take 12 weeks, unless it's for a care of a service member, in which case it's 26 weeks. And they say how the FMLA leave year is going to be calculated. So it could be the calendar year, or it could, a lot of employers do it so that the FMLA leave year starts on the day that you take the FMLA leave first. And then so your leave entitlement for those 12 weeks goes from the day you start leave to exactly 1 year after that. So that would be the third option. Some use the fiscal year, and then some use this rolling 12-month period, which goes back from the day that you stop leave. In any case, it's all going to be 12 months. So this hopefully won't affect things too much. The key employee provision is kind of an important part of the FMLA Leave Act because it allows an employer to not give you your job back when you return. This only applies to so-called key employees. So a key employee has to be salaried and among the highest paid 10% of all the employees in the 75-mile radius. The reason for this provision is that if the employee is so important that once they leave, the employer has to hire someone new to replace them, and the employer cannot just fire that person when that employee returns, then the employer can argue that it's going to suffer undue hardship if it gives you your job back when you return. So the employer will check off one of these boxes of whether or not you are considered a key employee. And so if you are a key employee, you can still take FMLA leave, but you are not guaranteed your job back at the end of it. So you can still take the 12 weeks and you can still get insurance throughout that time, but you won't be restored to your position at the end of it. To deny reinstatement, the employer has to give notice 3 times. At the time that the employee requests leave, at the time the employer figures out that they will likely deny reinstatement, and then again at the end of leave if the employee requests reinstatement. For Part B of rights and responsibilities, this covers whether it's paid or unpaid. So there are 4 options. Basically, the employer can require you to use paid leave during FMLA leave. And once the paid leave runs out, the rest is unpaid. For health insurance, during the paid leave, premiums are deducted from your pay as usual. And during the unpaid portion, either you pay the premiums or the employer pays them for you and then deducts them from your pay once you go back to work. If it is a situation where you need to pay your premiums, you have a grace period of 30 days or longer to make premium payments. So if you lapse on a payment, you have 30 days to make that before you lose your health insurance. The last part is you will be restored to the same or equivalent position at the end of your FMLA leave. And to keep this guarantee, you have to return at the end of the leave period. If you don't return, then the employer has the right to terminate your position. So this is the end of the employer notification form. So this is the form that you might see if one of your patients has asked for FMLA leave. They'll get this from their employer, and it will detail what kind of certification is required and what the terms of the leave are. So I think the important section would probably be, if I go back here. This section 2, additional information needed. And the second bullet point over here, where it shows what kind of medical certification is needed and what the due date is. Okay, so I know that that was a lot of information about FMLA. So I just want to also cover a little bit about the Hawaii Family Leave Law. So what is this law and how does it compare to the FMLA law? Because you might think, okay, this patient doesn't actually qualify for FMLA because they haven't worked 12 months for this employer, or they haven't worked this many hours, or they want to take care of their mother-in-law, but the FMLA doesn't cover mothers-in-law, right? So there are some kind of gaps in the FMLA. So we have the Hawaii Family Leave Law that can fill some of those gaps. So this is comparing the FMLA and the Hawaii Family Leave Law. So for the FMLA, you need to work 12 months, right? But for the Hawaii state law, you only need 6 months. But those months need to be consecutive and in the state. So it has a smaller work requirement before you start qualifying to receive this type of leave. The work requirement, the FMLA has this 1,250 hour work requirement, but the state law has no minimum work requirement. However, the company size is bigger for the state law. So to qualify for leave under the HFLL, you need to work for a company with 100 employees in the state for 20 weeks out of the last year, as opposed to 50 employees for 20 weeks of the last year. However, the 100 employees, that includes anyone on the payroll, even if those people are taking leave or they are part-time or intermittent or temporary workers. The 100 employees doesn't include people who are laid off, but it does include a lot of employees. The annual leave allotment is 4 weeks under the state law. As far as paid and unpaid, both are unpaid, but they can run concurrently with paid leave. So you can use your accrued sick leave that's paid concurrently with your Hawaii family leave. They differ in these definitions. So under the FMLA, the child has to be under 18 or incapable of self-care, right? But under the state law, the child can be any age. So you could take leave under this law, the state law, to take care of your child who is like 25 or 26, right? You wouldn't be able to take FMLA leave to take care of that child who's like 25 or 26 under the federal law. For parents, the Hawaii state law defines parents more broadly. So the sick family member could be a grandparent or an in-law also. And for the military, the state law doesn't have any special provisions for the military. So this is just to compare the two different laws. They have different coverage, and so you can decide which one would be best. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. For Hawaii family leave forms, you can find them by Googling Hawaii family leave application. And these are the two forms that are important. So from the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, you have the certification of a serious health condition form. This is the form that the doctor would have to fill out. I think it's about 5 pages, and it asks you about the health condition, and it has different sections to fill out. When the employee wants to apply for Hawaii family leave, they would go to this family leave application. And this is what it looks like here. This is a leave request form. And the employer may have their own form, but this is the one that the city and county has produced. Okay, so in a summary, FMLA is one of the several leave options along with paid leave and state family leave. So FMLA leave could be unpaid, but it's the most generous type of leave that allows you to continue your group health insurance and be restored to the same or equivalent position after leave. You can use the FMLA for many reasons. So childbirth and caring for a newborn in the first year, adoption and bonding with a child in the first year, caring for the spouse, parent, or child, caring for a service member, or for reasons related to the service member's deployment, and taking time off of work when you have a serious medical condition. So I'll make sure to give 30 days notice if possible and use the form provided by your employer to determine which kind of medical certification is necessary. These are some helpful links for the FMLA.